Go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're in a different time zone. I'm Lisa McDaniel, and I'm the Solid Waste Program Manager for the Mid-America Regional Council, which is the bi-state planning organization for the Kansas City metropolitan area. In that capacity, I serve as the contract planner to the Region East Solid Waste Management District, which is one of 20 solid waste management districts in the state of Missouri. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today in what we anticipate as the first of a series of workshops on recycling market development. And today our focus will be on recycled plastics. Sort of in NPR fashion, I'd like to introduce and acknowledge our other partners who've worked really diligently to make this workshop a reality. First, we have Gail Hubert, John Holmes, and Jim Callier from US EPA Region 7. This team provides education, outreach, and assistance to partners in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri on various EPA programs. Their work encompasses solid waste management, recycling, pollution prevention, food recovery, and other sustainable material management issues. I'd also like to acknowledge Sherry Jackson from the American Chemistry Council. She brings us the resources of the Flexible Film Recycling Group, which is a self-funded group of the ACC, whose members represent the entire polyethylene film value chain. The group facilitates recycling of plastic film packaging by engaging key stakeholders in education and outreach and supporting needed film recycling access and markets. Sherry also brings us the knowledge base and experience of Tanya Randall from More Recycling, which is a research and consulting firm. More Recycling has a deep understanding of the recycling value chain and the critical drivers in a circular economy with a particular focus on plastics. I'd also like to highlight our Missouri-based team. First, we have Angie Powell from the Missouri Recycling Association. MORA provides value to the state by connecting people, offering industry insights, and influencing policy to support our recycling economy and businesses. We also have Kristen Allen Tipton from the Environmental Improvement and Energy Resources Authority. The EIERA's Missouri Market Development Program promotes the development of markets for recovered materials and recycled content products throughout Missouri by providing businesses, governments, and other organizations with financial assistance and information services. And last but not least, our final member of the team is Rob Diedrichson with the Missouri State Recycling Program. This program partners with state employees and agencies to facilitate fiscally and environmentally responsible strategies for reuse and recycling of state property. So I'd like to, again, just thank everybody who's worked so hard on making this workshop possible. I do want to briefly go over our agenda for today. First, we'll start out with a panel of Missouri industry representatives who will share their experiences, successes, and challenges using recycled plastics in their various products. We'll then expand into a group discussion where we encourage you to share your thoughts on the use of recycled plastics. And we'll end with a sort of a high-level summation of what we learned today and share with you our anticipated next steps. Just a few housekeeping rules. We ask that you keep your microphones muted and your camera turned off. If you have a question for the speakers, please type it into the chat box located on your toolbar. And during the discussion phase, you can use the chat box or you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. The option to raise your hand depends on your Zoom settings. It can sometimes be found under the reaction button. It may also be found at the bottom of the participant screen. You just may have to search for it. If we call on you, you may unmute your microphone and turn your camera on to ask your question. And if you unintentionally have a filter on and appear as a cat, don't worry, we're all friends here. And also, please be patient with us if we experience any unintended hiccups today. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Kristen Allen Tipton to introduce our speakers.
Good morning, everybody. I'm pretty excited to have the three gentlemen that are with us today. All of these businesses have participated in the EIERA's Missouri Market Development Program. Our main thrust to help expand manufacturing capacity in Missouri is targeted towards purchasing the equipment that would be needed to manufacture a recycled content product. We also have a preference for using recycled plastics, which would enable an applicant to be eligible for a little bit more assistance than otherwise. So we're kind of proud of what these guys are doing, and hope you find what they have to say is interesting to you. Our first speaker is Matt Moore. Matt is the president of EverTrack LLC, the premier composite rail tie manufacturer in North America. Matt joined EverTrack in 2017 from Union Pacific Railroad, where he held various roles in track engineering. Matt served in the U.S. Navy as a civil engineer corps officer and holds a BS in chemical engineering from Colorado School of Mines and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks for everybody to be a part of this with us today. So very proud to talk about EverTrack. Most folks think of railroads, think of wood ties. They may even be familiar with creosote as a surface treatment for wood ties. Most folks don't know that there are about 20
Google.
million.
Stop.
Beg your pardon? Okay, maybe that's a mute drop. There are about 20 million wood ties replaced every year in the United States. EverTrack proposes to replace many, maybe most of those with a 100% recycled plastic glass fiber reinforced rail tie, as you see there on the title page. Next slide, please. So EverTrack, founded in 2017, partners in plastic recycling, railroad engineering, and tech startups. We're a veteran-led company with our core values that guide our operations on the floor, our strategic ambitions, and our relationships with suppliers and our customers. A couple of primary partnerships that give us the raw materials that we use: Granite Peak Plastics, with whom we're co-located at South Vandeventer near I-44, and Owens Corning, a manufacturer of our glass fiber reinforcement. Our wildly important goal as it relates to the consumption and the productive use of recycled plastics is 100,000 ties per year production and demand by the end of this year, and 1 million ties per year by 2025. Next slide. What that means in terms of consumption of plastic is about 200 pounds of recycled plastic per tie. So 100,000 ties this year is 20 million pounds of recycled plastic. 1 million ties is over 200 million pounds of recycled plastic every year. So as we look forward to scaling, we have a fantastic product that is as strong as wood ties are, as strong as the new hardwoods as they go into track. But the EverTrack tie stays strong and stiff forever, unlike wood, which declines precipitously over time, particularly in moist climates. You see a couple of pictures here of our heavy haul railroad track installations. On the left, you'll see a picture where we've interspersed with wood. On the right, that track was laid entirely with EverTrack ties. Those ties will look like that for 100 years. They're strong enough to support any conditions of freight and track, and they're weather impervious. So we're very proud to be able to promise to our kids and grandkids that the plastic reinforced ties that we installed in 2018, 19, and 20 will still be there when they enter and eventually retire from the railroads. Our process is very simple. As I mentioned, it's exclusively recycled plastic with glass fiber reinforcement, and a relatively straightforward production system gives us strong, consistent, and efficient production. Next slide. to understand a little more about why we're compelling for our Class 1 and transit railroad customers, I share this brief return on investment slide. I won't go into detail, but I'm happy to answer questions after the presentation. But I'll share that if we look at how long wood ties last in track, given the mechanical wear of trains running over them and the environmental degradation of moisture and bugs, we'll take an example of an area where wood ties would last 10 years. And the net present value of keeping that track in service for 1 mile with wood ties is about $1.2 million. Of course, that's discounted to infinity with some assumptions you see on the right side. On the other hand, in that same mile of track, if we were to install EverTrack ties up front, we get just about 55% of that 1.2 million in total NPV cost. And that lower NPV is realizable over every mile of track where those wood ties would last less than about 23 years. The assumptions on the right are relatively self-explanatory, and I'd be happy to take questions on this after. Next slide. So looking forward, what does the world look like from EverTrack's eyes? Well, we have a great team for disrupting the rail industry and dethroning wood as the staple wood tie. We've got an expert team with expert teamwork in our manufacturing process. Some of our principles are there on the page. We've got great material and process control and great partners with our plastics and fiberglass suppliers. We've got a great technology with how we put the tie together and produce. We've got industry expertise in plastics, fiber reinforcement, and railroads. And this is a great time. There's never been a better opportunity to raise the realization of plastic recycling and to create the fertile ground for bringing plastics from their post-consumer and post-industrial uses into a second life, which may be multi-generational in productive service in track. Next slide. All right, thank you. Any questions for me?
This is Kristen again. I had wanted to let you all know that you're welcome to type questions into the chat box at any time, but we will take questions between each speaker and then come around to them again if we don't get you all.
Hey, Kristen, here's a quick one for Matt before we move on. What kind of plastic are you sourcing as your feedstock?
HDPE and PP, polyolefins.
Rigids and flexibles or just rigids?
Just rigids at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Matt right now? Okay, we will move on. I think after you hear all three of them, you're going to start getting some questions for everybody because these are all very diverse projects. Our second speaker is Omar Gala. He's a mechanical design engineer and a serial entrepreneur, holding advanced degrees in both mechanical and aeronautical engineering with an emphasis in manufacturing from Arizona State University. He has since held corporate positions as a test and project design engineer in construction, automotive, and aerospace industries, where he designed and managed projects like the B-2 stealth bomber bomb ejection system, Delta IV mission critical safe arm device, and the Atlas V mission critical liquid rocket booster separation system, all of which are still currently in operation. He has since made a permanent career transition towards entrepreneurship, dedicating himself to a mission of creating sustainable food, water, and energy systems. He currently owns and operates a plastic injection molding company used to manufacture his patented rainwater harvesting system, a successful food processing plant, and a focus toward the sustainable local food movement, and Carbon Cycle, a waste to energy company. Go ahead, Omar.
Hi, thanks, Kristen. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my name is Omar. I'm a mechanical engineer. That's my boy on the right there. We've been working in Missouri for about 15 years. You can go to the next slide. About 15 years I've been a serial entrepreneur. My mission is food, water, and energy with a triple bottom line of like people, planet, and profit. And I've been holding to that for the last 15 years. About 13 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, we started working with Kristen at the EIERA and some private investors, and we were able to design and manufacture a rainwater harvesting system that's sold. You can go to the next slide. Sold in a bunch of stores, 500 plus stores, Menards, Ace Hardware, True Value, some Do It Best, Walmart.com, Amazon. We sell retail, brick and mortar, online, and work with a few installers and stuff like that. We've sold a lot of products over the years, and basically those counted as, our system was as we put a diverter in your downspout, and then you can save your water from the rain, goes into a barrel, but we can use recycled barrels. We've also tried making our products out of recycled materials because we do all our own injection molding, from the spigots to the diverters to the hoses to the adapters, and try to incorporate recycled plastics as much as we can. We definitely use all of our own regrind and have zero waste out of here, but we have tried purchasing other materials in the past to bring in for our injection molding process. Next slide. That's kind of where we found our issues with recycling plastics. One, we use a polypropylene, but it's an engineered plastic with about 20% talc filled. So it's hard to get recycled plastics that are blended exactly the way we need them to be blended, because it's a pretty harsh environment sitting outside in the sun all day. Because we deal with the customers, it costs us a lot of money to have a returned product. So if it cracks after a year or two, even though we have a warranty, but beyond that warranty, we don't want to leave our customers just out in the rain. So we replace most of our parts, but it's usually because at the beginning we were trying to use more recycled content. We even went into PLA, like the corn plastics, and that just kind of melted off the side of the house. But like the cost of returning one little plastic spigot was like $20 with shipping. So we had to stick with virgin materials for that, but we still use recycled barrels. And at the very beginning, we really touted it on our packaging that we were using recycled plastics. And in the end, we kind of overestimated how much people cared about it, because after they purchased it, they were just angry that it was broken. So we had to switch over to virgin plastics just for the main components. We'll still use a little bit of recycled for our other ones. So we kind of considered it not working so far, but it was downcycling. Just question, we work with white, we work with gray, brown, and tan. We blend our own, we purchase colorants and then blended about 2% from all over the place from distributors. But in finding some of those issues with recycled plastics, as I said, my mission is food, water, and energy. Our last, next slide. Our next little project here that we've been working on is a company called Carbon Cycle. So we've done this already on a small pilot scale, but we'll thermalize plastic, cardboard, wood, hay bales, tires, all of that with 99.9% HAP free, hazardous air pollutants free. We've got environmental controls and have done it. But we'll take those plastics and we'll turn it back into crude oil. And the way we're looking at it is, instead of using recycled plastics that are going to have degraded material specifications, like it'll lose its strength, it'll lose its elasticity, it'll lose tensile strength, become more brittle. If we can actually take that crude oil that we're pulling out of the plastic and maybe eventually sell that to a company like DuPont or other refineries, then we can actually take recycled plastic and make it exactly virgin plastic again, but not have to go back to the dinosaur oil to do that. We kind of see that as a bigger way of the circular economy working. And we've just received a contract from the DoD, the Air Force, that's interested in our concept, and we're working with those guys to build a larger plant here and to work on other alternative materials to carbonize and other value-added products made out of that carbon and oils. I'll make it quick, so I prefer questions than talking. So.
All right, Omer, we have one question here, and I'm also going to note that there's a couple from Matt that we'll just circle back to after our third presentation.
Okay.
We can see those right. But Omer, question we have here is, what colors do you have to have? And I'm going to guess that the follow-up to that is why.
Well, we try to match downspouts because they're white downspouts. We try to match them. People don't really want them to stand out. So if you go to Home Depot and you look at downspouts, there's typically a white, a brown, maybe a gray. But we primarily make most of our diverters out of white and brown. And that's so it blends into the landscape outside and the downspout gutters.
And Omar, this is Tanya, just as a follow-up. Did you find that there were certain components? I think you said something about you're still using your barrels back into your process, but are some of your components better able to use recycled plastic, or you're using only your own regrind and virgin and not using any other recycled plastic?
We do have some parts that we can still make out of recycled materials. They're parts that have to be very thick-walled and where strength is an important issue, or wear and tear on it. So some parts are, I like to call them dumb parts, where it doesn't matter what they're really made out of, and those would be the parts that we would use recycled materials. But when you're working with a spigot and you've got some tight tolerances and you need to seal and everything like that, and you have threads on it, well, we have to stick with virgin and a 20% talc filled engineered stuff. We have to stick with it, or it just kind of fails prematurely.
Here's another question for you, Omar. How many different recycled material suppliers have you tried?
We've gone through 2 distributors out of St. Louis, and asking for natural colored talc filled is usually the game stop. But you know, I would say it's been about 5 years since I've worked on resourcing our plastic. We've just kind of kept what works. It's scary to change plastics after product development when you're selling to companies like Menards, because they'll eat you up.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. For those, Omar is one of the few projects we have that actually has a product in big box stores across the country. And he does have some interesting tales of, you know, their requirements on their manufacturers and vendors are pretty stringent. So
one time we actually took our colorful box that was white, and then we remarketed it, did tests on it, and we think we made a better box. It was more craft, but it had pictures all over it, better instructions and everything. We got a $10,000 fine because we changed our box. But they are not okay with change ever. So what they bought 8 years ago, we've had a program with them for about 8 or 9 years. Every time we make a change, we have to tell them, and then it gets you this much closer to be like, never mind, we don't need you. So it's nerve-wracking to make any changes with big box stores.
Okay, here's another question for you is, what is talc filled?
It makes our plastic a little bit more rigid. So we're using polypropylene, and polypropylene at like higher temperatures at 120 degrees, 130, you know, like outside Arizona style, it'll get real soft and mushy relatively. And when we buy this engineered plastic, 20%, it's pre-blended. We don't deal with it. It just comes to us that way, but that gives it more rigidity and a little bit more strength.
Okay, are there any more questions for Omar out there? If not, we are going to move along to Roger. Roger Wilson is a former meat company executive from one of the largest meat companies in North America. Wilson Industries started nearly 3 years ago when, together with his wife Sherry and 4 grown children, they ventured out and purchased a PVC pipe manufacturer in Ozarks County, formerly known as Bryant Plastics. This last year, they expanded the recycling part of the business and can pulverize over 30,000 pounds per day of PVC materials. They operate 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Go ahead, Roger.
All right, thanks, Kristen. So on our first slide, I went a little bit with showing some of the recycled things that we can possibly use. And so we make pipe out of our recycled materials, and I'll get into that further towards the end of the presentation. But we get the shaved materials, the picture on the left, from some of the big pipe manufacturers out there. We get them from rehandlers that are making well casing and different things like that. But one of the issues that you're going to have with shavings and things like stavings or bits or small parts, they're very, very light. We've had trucks come in with 55, 60 pallets on a truck, and it only weighs 17,000 pounds. So shipping cost becomes a real big deal when it comes down to shavings. Next thing over you see is broken pipe. We get, to get 30,000 pounds plus a day through the system, the pipe is certainly a much handier thing to use. And the reason it's nicer, because if we run 1,200, 1,500 pounds an hour with pipe versus 600 to 900 pounds an hour with shavings, your utility costs, your labor costs, everything just continues to go up with the shavings on top of shipping. Sources for the pipe come from job sites, come from large distributors that have broken pipe on their yards. So when we're delivering pipe, we try to get them to hold a larger amount. We'll pick up recycled materials and bring them back. Moving on over, you get into some of the siding. Now those sidings of the different colors there are already ground up, and so that becomes one of the issues with sidings, or the volumes again that you get a lot of times come in small, and so you've got a lot of mixed colors. So that's probably what you see there is probably going to end up for us into a gray conduit. We'll probably have to add some color with it, but gray is a very dominant color, and recycled materials go well into conduit as well. The credit card material that you see all the way over on the right, that material comes in, and the window frame cutouts when you're punching the cards out, advertisement cards that don't have metals in them, and basically anything pre-chip or pre-metal added. Obviously, those are bigger issues. So next slide, please, Lisa. Some of the contamination things that you end up with in the bottom left of the pipe stacks that you see there, you can see some gaskets inside the pipe. Those gaskets are also not only rubber, but they're metal lined. So it does help that we've got several metal detectors throughout the process, but it's also very damaging once you finally hit something if you miss it. Some of those pipe will weigh 500 pounds a piece, so they get quite heavy, and so if a guy doesn't actually get to the end of it because he's picking it up with a machine, there's a chance of missing it. So obviously here in this picture, we'll pick it up and find it. But in a lot of the other materials, like the siding, you're going to find things like nuts and bolts and screws left in the siding, and we've gone so far as to have guys separate out their siding after it's been in a storm and it's just mud covered, and so it makes it very difficult for us to just openly accept some of the materials that come in. But like Kristen said, we go through 30,000 plus pounds a day of the material. a good majority of it we use back into making pipe. On the next slide, please, Lisa. And so in the pipe that we'll use our materials, you'll see some of the perforated sewer and the conduits over on the right. The reason we can get by with it in those materials, of course, is because they're not high pressure rated systems, and so with some of the recycled materials, you know, it just, you're not going to be able to make it into UL listed pipe or some of the ANSI standards that are going to fall into some of the high pressure pipe. One of the things that holds us back as a smaller company, and I think, you know, a little bit of Omar's deal is the testing that's required to get all of the materials that are in there, and then the, you know, what we call sweet batch, to be able to bring that back to more of a virgin material. The mixing of the pipe is certainly easy enough to do, but it's the testing and to know exactly what components you need to put back into it to make it something you can start from scratch again is a little different deal. The materials, you know, going through conduits and credit cards and all those different things, well, what we're using is PVC and a rigid PVC. So there's flexible PVC that you'll find into, you know, the medical industry, where you're the tubing that comes from the bags, the IV bags and things like that. That's flexible PVC, and of course, you know, we can't combine the two. There's another area that we've tried to get into in separate grinding to use some of the flexible PVC, but once again, there's a lot of the hospitals, you know, need to do a better job of sorting those materials out instead of just letting them hit landfills and go out into the trash. Next slide, please, Lisa. We also send a lot of our product out into 2,500 pound super sacks of pulverized material. One thing to, and this was in a partnership with EIERA, as far as the pulverizer that we're using, we were able to put in a pulverizer that does a very, very fine job. And some of our customers of just pulverized material were able to utilize 30% and sometimes 3 times the amount of recycled materials into their high standard, high pressure pipe than what they were able to use before we put in this particular pulverizer. So, you know, we've got a lot of different operations in the plant, from sifting to pipe manufacturing to fittings manufacturing, and then the latest is the pulverizer production room, where we've got, you know, 350 horsepower grinders, and then of course the twin 75 horsepower pulverizers that run in there. So with the amount of horsepower and the amount of electrical energy, obviously volume is key because of the throughput you need to offset utility costs. So any questions?
Hey, Roger, this is Tanya. I do have a question just to follow up on what you were talking about with the pulverizer. So that to me seems like you're making almost a very fine regrind. And are you saying that you're able to sell that to other manufacturers as a kind of a byproduct of your own kind of recycling process?
Well, we do. We have a couple of larger pipe manufacturers that we get their pipe in, their byproduct pipe in, and we will grind it and recycle it back into a powder and send it back to them in super sacks. So, you know, I've got one customer that's got 20 million pounds sitting on the ground, and another one's got 8 million pounds sitting on the ground.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Roger, we have a couple more questions for you. The first is, can you use flexible HDPE material?
Well, we don't use HDPE, high density polyethylenes. We don't use any of the polyethylenes right now at all. We are looking to add in an HDPE line because it's actually taken a lot of the PVC materials, you know, away in some of the conduits that were buried, because it's so easy to bury and install HDPE lines. The difference, though, of course, is cost. The HDPE material is over twice the cost of that of PVC, but the installation to be able to just trench it in and drive for miles has eroded a lot of the PVC.
Okay. And another question is, have you looked into solar for a power source?
Yeah, we certainly have. Solar for our consumption, our utilities, we're a small manufacturer, but our utilities are over 20,000 a month. And so the solar required to take us would be, something in the $1.5 million. And the payback's quite large. I'm actually looking into possibly, burning wood to make power.
Wow. And the final question I have for you is, are there any restrictions for you to using hospital tubing?
Well, once again, that would be a material that we would be trying to recycle and send back out. Since we're not currently using a flexible PVC. Flexible PVCs are used in garden hose manufacture. Currently, hospital grade manufacturers aren't able to use recycled materials in hospital grade. So most of that stuff would go on to things that would, like a garden hose or something like that. But we don't use a flexible material today. So it'd be something we would be trying to just get back out as part of the recycling business that we have.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to circle back to Matt, if you're still on, Matt. A couple questions that popped up for you.
Yes.
And this is a good one too. This was my question when I first got to know you, is how do you keep the different types of plastics sticking together? How do you get them to stick together?
We use an extrusion process, so they're melted and blended with the reinforcement.
I have actually got to witness some of this tie making, and it's kind of cool. So
it's a big piece of recycled plastic.
A giant piece, yes. And the second question we had for you is, what is the limiting factor in expansion for your business?
It will surely be the access to recycled plastics. The volumes that we would require at 1 million ties per year, which is a small piece of the railroad industry's need, would be a significant amount of the recycled plastic in the United States. So wow. The more HDPE and PP that's pulled from landfills and post-use, whether industrial or consumer, the better. And I think that will be our big challenge is finding ways to incent the proper recycling and processing of the post-use plastic.
Well, I think most of us on this call are really hoping that you have that problem. So
I think it's there in front of us. I think we're going to hit that because the product itself that we produce is in very high demand, and the railroads are pure performance players for a railroad cross tie that delivers everything that a new wood tie can do forever, becomes a very big value proposition for the railroads, and they've got enormous scale.
Thank you. And I just want to, I'm going to get ready to turn this back over to Lisa, but again, I want to thank all three speakers and just acknowledge for us in Missouri how fabulous it is to have this diversity of plastics manufacturers. None of these guys are mega corporations that are, they're all kind of mom and pop built, kind of built from the ground up right here in Missouri. So I'm proud to have you all here, and thank you very much for your time. And now back to Lisa.
Kristen, hey. we have one more question that popped in late, which is actually a really good question. If we could stick that in.
Let's do it.
Do any of the presenters receive diverted materials from landfills or MRFs?
That's all open to Omar, Roger, or Matt. Do you receive materials directly from a landfill or a materials recovery facility?
This is Matt. All of our plastic is diverted in the sense that it went through a MRF or it was procured through post-industrial or post-commercial collection. So that's, if I understand the question correctly, it would be, by definition, we're diverting from landfills.
I think that's probably true for anybody that's purchasing recycled plastics in Missouri, is they may be buying from a processor, but at some point it was diverted ultimately from a landfill, right?
Some of ours actually, when we started with, some of the people came straight out of their dumpsters because they were sending it. And I said, well, wait a minute, what are you guys doing there? And he said, well, we're getting rid of our product, you know. And I told him, well, wait a minute, I'll help you. Just save it and I'll take it when I bring truckloads in. I'll take truckloads out. So
that's true. Your business is really interesting in that aspect from most other plastic manufacturers I've ever worked with. You know, I've worked with your business prior to your owning it even, and at different times there would be quite a wide variety of different materials sitting out in the lot waiting for processing, you know, from storm damaged vinyl siding to, you know, just a variety of things that. Okay. All right, I don't think there are any more questions.
That's right.
Oops.
Oh, I was going to say, we are working closely with our Springfield landfill for carbon cycle. Not so much as plastics. We would more than happy take their plastics, but it's not sorted. More importantly, tires coming out of there because they're cutting them up and chopping them up. So we are working directly with our landfill.
Okay, thank you, Omer. There was a follow-up that wants to clarify, are they getting it from landfills? I think, I mean, I think I can respond to this, that very few landfills are selling materials directly from the landfill, but materials are diverted before they get to the landfill by somebody who's collecting them and then possibly processing them and then manufacturing. So unless somebody else wants to jump in and correct me, I would doubt that there are many people who are actually buying a load of materials directly from a landfill. I can't see that happening because most people need the materials to be sorted. All right, well, let's turn it. Oh.
No, I was going to just say, let's go ahead and go on to Lisa, and we can ask Jim's question as we go.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna, this is Lisa. I'm gonna keep my camera turned off so that you can see the full screen. But here's where we wanna give you the opportunity to share your thoughts with us. We'll be using a series of poll questions through the website Poll Everywhere to guide the remainder of the discussion. And hopefully we can sort of build upon what some of our speakers talked about. But you will have two options to access the polls and provide your responses. If you're going to use a browser, please go to pollev.com. You might find it easier to use your phone browser while keeping Zoom open on your computer. If you plan to use your computer, don't exit Zoom, just reduce it on your screen or split your screen so that you can go to pollev.com. To split your screen, you can press the Windows button on your keyboard while simultaneously clicking on either the left or the right arrow. Once you've logged onto pollev.com, you can join the poll by typing MarkKC, that's MARCKC, in the box for the username. And it's not case sensitive, so don't worry about it being all caps. If you are using a device, though, that autocorrects for spelling, please check that it hasn't corrected your typing to the name Mark before you join the poll. We had this experience a couple times when we were doing our trial runs, and we're sure that Mark was wondering why we were trying to join his poll. You can also participate by text, by texting MARCKC to 22333 and then text your responses to the question. So we thought if everybody could just take a second and go ahead and log on to pollev.com, that's POLLEV.com. We'll run you through a simple poll to get started. So let's channel your inner potato and share with everyone how you would like to be cooked. For this poll, you can hyphenate or you can underscore if your answer has 2 words like French fried. So far, it's a baked and mashed. Mashed has taken the lead.
I like making tater-totted into a verb.
Okay. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to figure this out. And I think what we'll do, Tanya, is we'll go ahead and move to the first poll question.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. Okay.
So we know we have some manufacturers that beyond our presenters as well. So if you are a manufacturer of a product, you know, we'd love to have your responses as well. You know, what are your biggest challenges to using more recycled content in your products? And obviously, Matt, Roger, and Omar can answer as well. And you also have the ability, you can send more answers. You can answer more than once as well. So. And what we're going to do is kind of have a chance to see these. And if anyone wants to unmute themselves and actually speak about this more broadly than what you want to type, feel free to also unmute yourself. You don't have to turn your video on. You can just unmute yourself and just let you know who you are. So I can't, Lisa, can you scroll so we can see?
Yes, so far it's lack of food contact, approved resin options, supply, contamination, consistent color, and consistent strength. Can you read them now?
Yeah. And I actually wanted to ask Omar, if he doesn't mind me calling him out a little bit. You know, the fact that you need to use something that's beyond just virgin resin because you're using the 20% talc filled. I just wanted to maybe have you touch on a little bit the concept of engineered plastic resins that aren't just kind of off the shelf material. You're getting a very special blend. And I think that goes hand in hand with this question in particular, maybe talking about like why it's like you can't even buy just normal polypropylene resin either. You've got a very specific blend that you're looking for, and maybe the kind of the challenges therein with recycled plastic. I mean, with engineered plastic in the first place.
So one of the issues is once you design your part, then you make your mold, and your molds are very expensive. You know, $50,000, $100,000 molds, and if you have a certain wall thickness, it's really hard to go back into that mold and change that mold. So you start developing, and so you either have the choice of like, all right, do I get a different plastic with different material strengths, or do I change my mold? Sometimes we don't want to change the mold for other geometry or function or something like that, where we need something that's thin walled. So a lot of times when you're dealing with very specific plastic parts that are serving a kind of a detailed function, you don't have the option of putting in whatever kind of plastic works. You have to put the plastic with the specs that you need.
Thanks. And Lisa, can you scroll maybe? It looks like we've stopped getting them smaller. You know, I think one of the other things that kind of goes together, supply, lack of food, grade, adequate volume. If anybody else would like to speak to that too, and I think Matt touched on it a little bit of just not being able to get enough. Would anybody like to maybe give us a little bit more detail on kind of the lack of what you really need coming from the recycled side of the plastics value chain?
This is Roger. I'll speak a little bit to the volume. You know, batching, if you're only going to get in a small volume and you have to be able to combine that, you know, if you're running 2,000 pounds an hour on one of the extruders, you just, you can't just zip through one item and all of a sudden change into something else. So obviously volume is pretty major of a similar material. anyhow.
Are there any other participants who are not our normal speakers that would like to unmute themselves and kind of speak to any of their challenges in particular? Okay, Lisa, do you want to move on to the next question?
Sure.
What would compel you to use more recycled plastic? For example, consumer or market demand, policy mandates, other sorts of, shifts or that sort of thing. This is also for manufacturers, or I think this could also be if anybody who's in the government sector is thinking about buying recycled plastics for projects or whatever. What would compel you to do so? Is it going to be something that's driven by the market? Is it going to be driven by government mandates or policies or any other. So we've got availability coming up. So I'm assuming that's availability of a specific grade that you're looking for. Price. So this seems like more market demands. So let me put this forward to you as well. Would something that was a policy mandate, yes, economies of scales to drive competitiveness against virgin, that was going to be my next question of, if there was a policy in place that mandated recycled content or somehow leveled the playing field with virgin, would that actually help, move your use of recycled content further? And anybody would like to answer that online as well, happy to unmute yourself. Mandates, yes, but not radical. Fair enough.
One thing I mentioned earlier is that we put recycled content when you say consumer market demand. We really did try. We actually put in our installation manual, and this was, we would say, if you want to throw your thing away, give it to us and we'll recycle it. Like I said, we sold 50,000 units and not a single person ever emailed me or ever asked me, where do I send the parts that I want to throw away?
Right.
So it's like the demand sounds great until it goes into reality and people don't. It seems like people didn't care. It was the quality of the product and convenience at the end.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's, I think to Matt's point of the amount of plastic that he would need to be able to, really ramp up his production. And I think Roger would probably agree with this as well. It's an economy of scale, right? You have to be able to get enough material to feed your machinations and your processes. And so I think there's a flip side of this of how do you get the consumer engaged with the fact of, oh, I can recycle this, how do I do it? And I think that's a really good point, Omar. Yeah, it looks like some more, ability to segregate 3 through 7s out of the MRF, extremely reduced cost to justify other costs, availability of food contact, big box companies to take the lead and not allow for non-traditional colors, et cetera. Yeah, I think that's a really critical, point too, is that we know a lot of brands and consumers have expectations for a very specific look and sometimes even a feel of a product, and sometimes recycled content struggles to match that kind of look, but not necessarily the functionality. And so how do we also address the idea that, perfectly pristine white package isn't necessarily what needs to happen to hold a product versus, it could be gray or black or brown and it actually serves the same purpose. So I think that's a really good point as well. Any other responses, or we can move on to our next poll question.
There's a question that came up, where can PVC be dropped off by the consumer?
Roger, do you know of any drop-off locations or any places that you're servicing or anybody within the state of Missouri that might have details about that?
No, we actually advertise a little bit that people can drop it off here. We've had some people come out of Springfield, and we're 65 miles away from Springfield, and they believe it or not, delivered it here. So, but other than that, we don't have any place. The state of Maine is trying to get us to recycle their stuff. So, yeah, it would be nice to have something like that.
Roger, do you still do business with a supplier called Second Chance Materials out of St. Louis?
No.
He used to set trailers around at construction sites for people to drop vinyl siding,
Okay.
and other things, but I haven't talked to him in many, many years. He may not be around anymore.
I'll look it up.
Okay, so here's our last question for manufacturers. What resources do you need to use more recycled plastics? MRF and processing infrastructure, more deposit laws to increase supply, detailed databases with material specs, colors and prices. You can research. Okay. And it's interesting, no one, higher collection rate, post use. One of the things that I think we also wanted to bring up, and I don't actually live in the state of Missouri, so I will punt this to someone else that can really speak to it, is also the idea that there are, no one seems to be mentioning financial, support. So I'm wondering, Lisa or someone else in Missouri, Kristen or Rob, that maybe wants to talk about some of the resources that might already be available to that fit some of these needs and criteria.
Sure, I can start it off and maybe then Kristen can chime in. We have 20 solid waste management districts in Missouri that have grant programs to support waste reduction and recycling projects. So I think, finding out who the local district is can, help you with perhaps a grant to get some financial resources. And then Kristen, if you want to talk about your grant program.
Sure. The EIRA operates the Missouri Market Development Program, and we do provide financial assistance to people manufacturing recycled content products or processing materials. So, for instance, a business like Roger could get some help from us to buy the pulverizer he needed so that he can process materials so that other manufacturers can use it. Or a business like Matt's could get some assistance from us to buy some equipment that he might need to make railroad ties out of recovered plastics. There are not other Missouri specific programs that I am aware of. There are some national level programs. Rob, did you know a little bit more about the closed loop fund?
Yeah, not really, but I'll just read from their website. I know that they've done extensive work, and I don't know, maybe Tanya or even Sherry can weigh in on this. But on their webpage, it just says that closed loop partners, our funds, it says from venture capital, growth equity, and private equity to project finance, we create an arc of capital that accelerates the growth of early stage companies through to established companies, and they have quite a diverse portfolio. They have a couple different funds. It looks like the closed loop infrastructure fund and the closed loop beverage fund. That's about all I can say about that.
This is Angie. They spoke at the MORA conference a few years ago in Kansas City, and it is a good, a good resource. I think folks should definitely check them out. They had some significant funding back in the day. I haven't heard of like the recent projects, but definitely that fund is still out there.
When Rob, there was a request if you could put that link to the closed loop partners website in the chat, that would be great. Oh, perfect. You already saw it. Sherry, did you want to add anything about the closed loop partners and anything that ACC may know about work that they're doing, or any concurrent work that you are working on?
No, I think their resources are, better captured on their website.
Okay,
I don't have specifics to add.
perfect. Here's a question. Why doesn't Missouri have a deposit for bottles like New York? Anybody want to take that question?
It's just political.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
it-
I think
you
there
know,
were some communities that had deposit laws, and the beverage manufacturers and the retailers are not usually in favor of those. It just creates more havoc for them, space demands and that whole infrastructure. So there was a huge lobbying effort, and so yeah, it is. I think that's a very political thing here in the state, and they had the political power to kind of get rid of some local, and regional efforts.
Right. We have a comment on the chat from Margaret that we have Anheuser-Busch in Missouri. That's probably why we do not have a deposit for bottles.
Well, and I will add to this, there are only 10 states in the whole country that have deposits, so Missouri is definitely not alone. So I think there's a real, but we also know with all of the PET mandates and goals that bottlers and brands have put out, we don't have enough bottles to meet that demand. So this may be, to Omar's question, we may actually see a shift in kind of acceptance of bottle deposits, because if you want to make the 50% PET recycled, bottle sort of thing by 2025 or 2030, we don't have enough bottles to meet that. And I think that goes back to Matt's point too, of not having enough material. So we may see in the future a shift away from fighting against deposits, because they may absolutely need them to actually meet their goals. So, but I think we can go ahead and move on to Lisa. I think this is a really great discussion, and obviously keep putting the questions in the chat. And one thing before we move away from the manufacturers, Jim had asked if the time at an appropriate time, would any of the companies be open for tours? So that's for Matt, Omar, and Roger. Do you ever have kind of the public or a small group of folks into your facilities?
I'll be ready for tours in a year.
Okay.
That was Omar. How about Matt? I know your neighbor, Repolly, would do some tours. Are you intending to do some EverTrack tours?
We do sometimes, usually for customers. The interest from the public hasn't been widespread, mostly for reasons of familiarity. And we're also a pure play manufacturing facility, so there are risks in moving equipment that we'd have to be careful of it. So it's not where we find our greatest success, but if people came by, we could run them through.
Okay. And Roger, how about watching all that conduit being made down in Gainesville is pretty interesting, but it takes a drive to get there.
It does. It takes a drive to get. We have had tours through, but once again, it's been, local schools and different things like that, where, trying to work on, work programs for kids and things like that. So, but we certainly have been open to do that. Yes.
Thank you. So we're moving on. This is to the general audience. So this is for anybody that's actually on. What is your perception or impression of recycled plastic products that affects your use of the material? So just wondering, at high level, when you're thinking about recycled products, what do you think? What could somebody decipher that for us? What does their dog think about recycled plastic? So it looks like some folks, are actively looking for it, like to use them when they can, like to buy them when they can. And then there's some, the idea of, the fact that there are certain aspects of it that maybe aren't as comparable to a virgin. So, recycled content is still suspect in people's minds as not being the same quality. Try to avoid any single-use product if long-term items are made of recycled plastic. That's great. Try to buy recycled products when I can, just as good as virgin for typical products. In favor, but feel it's a real niche market. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, a very good overview of where, kind of where the rubber meets the road. I think a couple of people have mentioned expensive. And I don't want to put Matt or Roger or Omar on the spot because I know that this sometimes can be a little bit proprietary, but I wonder if one of you or all of you wanted to chime in on the fact of why recycled plastic is more costly in general, and whether it's more costly to purchase or more costly for you to use because you've got to change your processing a little bit.
There's a lot of processing changes for sure. This is Omar.
So that drives your cost up just because of the nature of the beast.
Right. And so if you keep changing your percentages, then you're changing your cooling times, changing your pressures, your velocities, and everything. So you need to stay consistent, and every time it's there, it ends up being an issue. And sometimes you have to use more plastic because it's not as strong.
Right.
That's another question that's me or Drew about anything that comes up in the next.
Was that a question, or was that somebody just not muted properly?
I think that was a mute issue.
Okay. And I think, Roger, it might have been you talking about how HDP is a lot more expensive than PVC. Did you?
Yes.
And is that are you trying to source natural, or is that with colored HDPE as well?
No, that's just based on recycled materials costs, right? Yeah. The issue, and agree completely with Matt, that you have to have a volume to be able to set a run. We can have some materials like a credit card that might, run through our machines and melt at 320 degrees, and you run another material that I need to be pushing 500 degrees.
Right.
So it's a major, volume of like material, and then what you need to do to bring it back up to close to virgin, which once again we call it sweet batch, the stuff that we have to add back to it. So.
Right. Lisa, can you scroll through this one more time, and that way, as we're reporting out, we're making sure we've got everything.
This is Matt. If I could jump in also,
Sure.
Not every recycled alternative is more expensive. For EverTrack, we use recycled materials primarily because it's less expensive than virgin HDPE and PP.
Okay.
So it's our economic strategy to use the best, lowest cost material, and that happens to be recycled material.
Excellent. Thank you. I think that's a really critical point, because I think that that's one of the maybe falsities is it's always more more expensive, but I think you've just pointed out that in some cases it can be less expensive, and that's why it makes a good. It's not only just for sustainability and circularity reasons that you're using it; it's also a cost issue. I think we caught the gist of this.
You want me to move on?
Yeah, I think let's go to the next one.
Okay.
So this is for the general audience as well, and I think we've got folks from all parts of the sectors and governments and processors and haulers and obviously manufacturers. Are there any innovations, i.e. collection, processing, manufacturing, et cetera, needed to drive plastic recycling? And I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but thinking outside of the box, if you, in a perfect world, what really drives plastic recycling, either in your role or I think more broadly? So I want to go a couple of things here. I know that a little bit of this talks about like collection in general in Missouri, and curbside collection and collection of like materials. And I was just wondering if we could have someone either from a solid waste district or a local government, or even from Rob, perhaps from the recycling program. Like, what does that really mean in a state like Missouri, where you're providing more access and really making it easier for consumers and kind of that sort of thing? So I want to start with that first.
Hey, Tanya, this is Angie. I think collection, is a challenge right now with trucks, drivers, for a myriad of reasons. The markets have been such an issue. I think, and then too, even after the material is collected, I think, a big issue is contamination. To me, that's kind of in this conversation we've had the last 20 minutes is you have some manufacturers talking about that volume needed, and then, the reality is there's a lot of collection programs out there. We have all these materials and we can't market it just because of the condition and the contamination. And if there's some folks on here that run a MRF or, that are having troubles, kind of moving that material, they can speak to that as well. But it's, I think folks want to recycle, public opinion survey after survey, says it's an importance. They just, we've got to learn to make it a marketable product.
I think that's a really good point, Angie. Is there anyone from a MRF or collection program that would like to unmute themselves and kind of answer that question too about, where between the collection and providing a service to consumers and moving it up the chain to an end user?
Yeah, Nick, Paul, City of Columbia folks, are you guys on here?
This is Tom Elliott with the City of Columbia. I supervise the MRF here. So on the question, is it how to help that, or?
Well, yeah. I think, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you guys are kind of firmly in the middle of the collection and then, trying to market something. So, what would be helpful or what are your challenges related to, moving plastics recycling forward?
Okay, so we're kind of in an unusual circumstance with our trash collection right now. It's moving to a pay-as-you-throw system, which just started 1st of February. Before that, City of Columbia had hand pickup of trash. It's remaining hand pickup of trash. In other words, bags are on the curb. There's no real carts, and there was no limit. It was a one-time monthly fee, basically unlimited as long as it was the bulky items were less than 4 foot and it was bundled. There were some limitations. And starting this month, there is it's not a 2-bag a week limit, but basically citizens get vouchers for 2 bags a week or 104 bags a year. And then after that, they have to pay $2 a bag to put extra trash on the curb, and there's no longer bulk pickup. So with our transition, we're hoping that a pay-as-you-throw system will encourage more people to take the recycling out on curbside so that we have an increase of diversion. I think that will happen. I do think it's going to be growing pains, and we're going to see an increase in trash and contaminants in the recycling process. So as we go through that, I see having more plastics in the recycle stream. The other part of that is our MRF is mainly hand sorting. We do have an eddy current and a magnet for tin, and aluminum, but otherwise we're hand sorting. So the problems we have is getting all of the plastic out of the stream in clean and separated properly. We do separate 3 through 7s as well as number 1 and number 2. In order to do that, we've had to combine our number 2, our HDPE, into a single bin, so it's a Z bale instead of separate natural and color products. But our 3 through 7 is kind of not a very good mix to sell right now. It's depending on who wants that, they want different items in there. So, you know, one broker, one purchaser may want some of the clamshells that are number one, and then the rest of them don't, for instance, or having the fives taken out, or what it is, whatever it is for a particular. So we have a hard time right now with the 3 through 7s. The pricing has been up and down, as you guys know, but we've had a pretty good ability to sell our PET and our HD without much trouble. Sometimes it's at a very low price, but we don't have any trouble selling what we do get. Now, we're a fairly small MRF. I guess we're kind of big for a municipality, but we're really tiny compared to the commercial guys. So, you know, we sell maybe a load a month of the PET and the HD, and less than that of the 3 through 7s. So I don't know, does that help at all?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think it really adds to the conversation. I think there's a couple of touch points of, you know, infrastructure, like what would you need to make your sorting better, space with, you know, bunkers and, you know, volume and collection and driving more diversion. I think there's a lot of pieces swirling here. And I was going to have Lisa scroll just very slowly. You know, there's MRF separation technologies, again, you know, the infrastructure investment, ease for consumers, policies, curbside pickup, increased industrial and residential access, all of the above, in markets and manufacturing before collection, you know, stuck, programs are being stuck, you know, the public perception, I think that's a good point too, automation to offset labor costs. If our facility can divert plastics, you know, contacts. I think it's just, you know, idea of just resources in general. Container deposit for Missouri. I think that's something for you guys to pick up if you want. You know, doing the right action as an altruistic act. Bringing power to the people. Yeah, I think, and I think, yeah, Omar, you touched on really well the idea of carbon cycle. We haven't really touched very much on like the idea of chemical recycling, you know, and going back to a kind of a base polymer or a base component and then reprocessing it into plastic. So I think that's something else to talk about, is that there's technologies outside the scope of just your general taking it in a bin, sorting it and converting it somehow, you know, in its solid normal state as well, the idea of innovation in that regard. So we've got one more question, and this is also, I think we do have a fair number of government agencies and solid waste. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, may I just real quick, this
Yes.
is Rob. I just wanted to, there was a comment on that last survey question that caught my attention. It said, focus on, I can't remember exactly how I read, focus on commercial, not residential. Insofar as the collection and diversion from the landfill, that kind of thing. It does seem, you know, from my perspective, and I work entirely with state government agencies on recycling and waste reduction. And what I've learned through the years is that, at least from my perspective, and there may be some things I'm missing here from the overall picture, but there are significant amounts of resources dedicated to residential recycling, and not so much on the commercial side. And I see a lot of opportunities. I mean, if we were to just focus on government, in-house government recycling, there's huge opportunities at the state and federal levels to divert more material. I think it's under-resourced for government, for sure. I can speak pretty confidently to that. But as far as the commercial part of it, you know, I think it was someone was talking about, you know, going, you know, delivering a load of material or product, I guess, and seeing scrap PVC in the dumpster, and they said, hey, we'll take that back and recycle it for you. And it seems to me that's how a lot of these commercial arrangements work, is that, you know, companies just work amongst themselves. And so I don't know if there's an opportunity to increase collection with more resources dedicated towards the commercial side of things as opposed to the residential. But I just wanted to weigh in on that. Yeah, focus on industry, not residential.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Rob, and it's a really good segue. It's not exactly the right, you know, it's not exactly the next question in the sense of, you know, how do we get more resources? But I think it's something that we can talk about, as this is one part of multiple workshops, that maybe this is something that we can bring forward in the future. So as the segue to government agencies, the biggest challenge to buying more recycled content products. And I was wondering, Gail, if you wanted to just mention while people are responding, and maybe even drop in the chat, the CPG information from the federal level purchasing guidelines.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that.
Yeah, Tanya, just so you know, we've got about 8 minutes left.
Yeah, I think this is I think this is going to be a really good segue. So let's have folks drop in their responses. Lisa, you can pull those. And I do want to be able to have just a quick wrap up from Sherry, Angie, and Gail, kind of what our kind of wrap up is and kind of next steps. So I want to make sure we have time for that. So go ahead and drop in your responses and we will pull these forward. And I think to Rob's point, for government agencies, both buying and using more recycled content, but also how can we help leverage more of getting the bigger volumes from, concentrated generators, whether it's post-industrial or post-consumer recycling, I think is a really good point to pull forward too. So as these are coming forward, feel free to finish on typing in your responses and we will read this. We're actually having a group meeting next week to kind of distill all of this. Sherry, do you want to do a quick high-level reporting from the manufacturer perspective of maybe what we heard today?
I'm sorry,
Sure.
Tanya.
Oh, go
Tanya,
ahead.
before we go into that, this is Roger again.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing that I know that I get a lot of information from is the international, what they're doing over Germany and these other countries that probably are a little further ahead in recycling than we are, and I don't know what state governments and federal governments are doing to do lessons learned from the other countries, of course. But I mentioned the hospital thing. Well, they've got recycling bins in the hospitals now in a lot of the foreign countries where they take some of their flexible PVCs and they're putting them in a bin. So
Right.
they're saving them right in spot. So just a thought, and I'll leave that out there.
No, I think that's a really great point for us to take into account as we move forward with these workshops. Thanks, Roger. Do you want to go ahead, Sherry?
Sure. The key takeaways that I got from the manufacturers' questions, some of which confirmed our thinking, some offered some really good new insights in terms of the biggest challenges. And these are some of the things, again, we've heard before: the consistency of color and strength, lack of food contact approved resins, contamination, customers too concerned about color, adequate volume of similar materials, testing, and testing cost. And noted something Matt said about how best to incentivize use of recycled material. In terms of what compels you to use more recycled plastics, again, availability of food contact resin, availability, affordability, and return on investment, economies of scale to drive competitiveness with virgin, mandates, but not radical, increase more processing, retailers to allow for the use of non-traditional colors. And in terms of resources, of course, number one, financials such as grants, detailed database of specs, different types of equipment, more processing and support, and deposit laws to increase supply. That's all I have.
Thanks, Sherry. Angie, I think you were handling the second two questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure mine are as detailed as Sherry's though. Wow. For manufacturers, what resources do you need to use more recycled plastics? Several answers here. Just there needs to be more infrastructure, manufacture or MRF and processing infrastructure. There was several notes about deposit laws. A detailed database with specs that would kind of help manufacturers as they search for sources, higher collection rates, equipment needs, financial incentives, and then some more comments about like deposit laws. And we're going to go over these in detail, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then moving on to the general audience, what is your perception and impression of recycled plastic products and how did that affect your use of the materials? And the perception, I think there was several concerns about quality, especially like with food grade products, BPAs, odors, colors, appropriate labeling, several comments about expense, it being a niche market, and so on. But there were also a lot of favorable comments that, I think those on this call and in this workshop are invested. And so I think probably this is the best of the best, trying to buy recycled content when we can from a personal standpoint. And that's it.
Oh, thanks, Angie. And Gail, I think you had the last two questions.
Yeah, this was needed to draw, what innovations are needed to drive plastic recycling? And some of the challenges to that were mentioned was material, even after the material is collected, of course, it's contaminated. Numbers 3 through 7 are hard to, they're mixed up and hard to separate. Some of the innovations would be in burp separation technologies, using optical sorters. And there's also increasing the convenience for residential pickups and curbside pickups. And there was mention of policy. Policy drives recycling and commercial, and even at the manufacturing industrial level to include collection of those too.
All right.
I don't believe, and maybe I missed it, the last question.
Yeah, we didn't really go over those because we were running a little short on time. So I think let's reconvene on that, and because I think that might be something that we want to kick forward as well, because, beyond just manufacturing, like the idea of what role does procurement play in this. So on that, do you want to wrap up a little bit? I think Lisa has a slide with our contact information. And Gail, you want to talk a little bit about what to expect in the next couple of months and kind of where we're going from here. And Lisa as well, chime in as you want.
Yeah, well, first thing, on behalf of all the hosting organizations, we would like to say a big thank you to the panelists and to everybody for taking time out of your day to share insights with us on this important topic. And your input will help us learn where we can invest our time and resources that may be of assistance to the plastic manufacturers and industry in Missouri, in the Midwest. Look for an email in the next few days with some slides and a summary of today's discussion and follow-up evaluation. And we're not stopping the discussion here. We want to keep the conversation going, so we're planning more workshops to take a deeper dive into recycled plastic commodities with a broader group of stakeholders in April. So we really hope you will come back and join us in April, invite others to join us too. On the screen, you'll see our contact information, and we're happy to talk to any of you anytime. And that's it. Lisa, Kristen, Tanya, anything else you have to add?
Lisa, I'm going to hop in on one thing, and then I'm going to let you wrap it up. I think it's really critical when Lisa sends the follow-up, your input and your feedback is really going to be really helpful, especially, about how we want to move forward. So we appreciate everybody coming today and answering the polls and participating in the discussion. But let us know kind of what you thought about today and what might be helpful moving forward. So Lisa, you want to take us home?
Yeah. Thanks everybody so much for your time and your input. We will be looking again at the poll questions. We'll also be looking at the questions you put in the chat. Again, look for an email from me with a survey that will be very helpful. And again, thank you so much for your time. And I think I'm going to shut it down now if everybody's good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.